Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
This Week at Work is the only show about the workplace that offers you front row seats and a microphone featuring experts in human resources and employment law to bring you practical, timely, and accurate insights so you can more effectively lead your organization. It's Thursday, October 19th, episode 253. Today, we're diving headfirst into the swirling maelstrom of DC politics, where the hot mess in the House might be spilling over and cluttering your cubicle. As internal battles continue at our nation's capital, we explore the ripple effects of policy shifts on your day-to-day work. So get your questions ready for Jim Plunkett, who's ready to unpack the intricacies of DC's influence on your workplace. Don't forget to take the poll as well. All this and more on This Week at Work.
Good morning and welcome back, everyone. Bert, good morning. Thank you for covering me last week when I was having some technical difficulties.
Phil, covering for you is never easy, but I hope we pulled it off with some modicum of success.
I thought you all did a great job. I was listening in the background, panicking behind the scenes here, trying to get things back up and running, and just couldn't do so until the last couple of minutes. And it didn't make sense because I knew you were going to make fun of me at that point when I joined in. So I just stayed off the air altogether. But
I would never make fun of you.
Oh, at least not to my face. Anyway, we've had a lot of things going on. You've had a great labor law update just a week ago, and we did our Right to Weed program. That was quite a success again.
It was, and as always, Master Sergeant Tyler Jenkins from the Missouri State Highway Patrol was just invaluable, showing people what the indicia of impairment look like and how to give people sort of an introduction to what field sobriety looks like.
Absolutely. I know I keep, I'm not going to be intoxicated in any way and drive, but I feel like I know what they're going to test me on at this point. And we had a great performance by Mary Jane and Margarita. They both did a wonderful job as well on stage. And speaking of that, I know we have a Wayfinder Summit coming up for us. We're going to be hosting our first big event down in Orlando with our new merger that is taking place down there. We have several people that are have been on the show who are popular fans of AIM. Andrew Adeniyi, who is coming in from Indianapolis, and he's going to close out our day with a great conversation about leadership. Ryan Collier, who is going to talk about generating artificial intelligence and using it in the recruiting space. Ryan does a great job and has been a longtime friend of the association. And of course, we wouldn't do this without a legal update as well. But speaking of legal updates, today we have our man from Washington, D.C., the guy straight from the street, Jim Plunkett. Good morning, Jim. How are you?
Good morning, Phil. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, we're happy. We've missed having you on the program. I know you've been busy, but we're happy to have you. And there's a lot going on in Washington, so I look forward to getting some insight from you as well. But before we do that, let's kick off our poll questions today. Let's see. Our first question is, how often do you submit responses to proposed policy changes during a comment period? And we have a draggable scale. It's a new introduction for us. So you can just drag the scale, and it is from never to always. I can say that I haven't submitted comments very frequently in the past. I would do so more frequently now. And then the other question is...
So Phil, real quickly, just let me give a little context. Your question obviously relates to when agencies like the Department of Labor right now have issued a notice of proposed rulemaking, in this case, as Jim was going to talk about, relating to the changes to exempt status, and they issue that notice of proposed rulemaking, and it opens up a comment period for employers and other interests to write in to the Department of Labor offering their comments on the proposed changes.
That's absolutely correct. And when I practiced safety many years ago, I would make comments back then on new safety laws that were coming out, the lockout, tag out, those types of things when they were first coming out, confined space when it first, that's dating myself. That tells you how long ago. But then also in my position here at AIM, I've made comments as well, representing our opinions in that space. But yes, thank you for that clarity, Bert. I do appreciate it. And then the second question is, in what category would you file news, or which category would you file news that follows from the national capital? Anywhere from essential, useful at times, entertainment, pointless, or embarrassing. And Nick, I assume this is a one selection, not select all that apply.
That is correct. And
because it is essential. Sometimes it's not useful, and sometimes it is. It's definitely entertainment, but it is very embarrassing often in the process we take. So just select which one applies. That's a great question as well.
Essentially, it's a word cloud, but it's my words. You have to choose.
Okay. All right. Good. You're getting creative. All right. Bert, you ready for Lawyer on the Clock?
I'm ready, Phil.
All right, Nick, pull that lever.
All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
So the first one that I want to talk about really does hit close to home for me, as many of our listeners know, but I'm going to try to keep, obviously, my own positions out of this. I found the story itself really interesting. The Starbucks Corporation and their workers union have sued each other over pro-Palestinian social media posts. So this is a fight between Starbucks and its own union now. The coffee giant wants workers united, Starbucks Workers United, to stop using its logo after it posted messages backing Palestinians and condemning Israel in wake of Hamas's assault on Israel. So what's really interesting here, Starbucks sued their own union, Starbucks Workers United, in federal court in Iowa, saying that those pro-Palestinian social media posts from a union account earlier in this war angered hundreds of customers and damaged its reputation. They're suing for trademark infringement, demanding that Starbucks Workers United stop using the name Starbucks Workers United, and also to stop using a circular green logo that resembles the Starbucks logo. In response to this, the union, Starbucks Workers United, responded with its own filing, asking a federal court in Pennsylvania to rule that it can continue to use Starbucks name and a similar logo. And the Workers United also said Starbucks defamed the union by implying that it supports terrorism and violence. So really kind of an interesting fight here going on between the union and the company itself. We know that they've been really quite antagonistic with one another. Is the union has attempted to organize, sometimes successfully, many Starbucks locations throughout the country.
And that is, I don't know, to me, that's just very shameful approach to draw an attention to yourself. But I got to believe that's going to be very precedent setting in the sense that would you be at this case may determine how those brands may or may not be used in the future as it relates to political positioning.
Yeah, I think we'll really have to keep our eye on these cases and see it could impact really how unions use logos and the names of their employers moving forward. So, anyway, really kind of an interesting case in the news, hot topic right now.
Well, I know you'll be following that, so keep us up to date on that, please. Yeah,
of course. Sticking on the union issue, I thought this one was somewhat amusing. So, Bill, we've talked before in the past that there's sort of a union of the unions, and most people are aware of it. It's called the AFL-CIO. And the AFL-CIO basically has about 60 unions that are members of the AFL-CIO. They're basically, it's sort of synonymous with the American labor movement. It's a 67-year-old umbrella group that includes the Federation of Teachers, the American Postal Workers Union, the Writers Guild of America. They represent about 12.5 million workers. They represent the auto workers. And what's really interesting here is that the AFL-CIO, the sort of umbrella group of unions, last week, their staffers actually picketed in Washington, D.C., their union members, their own union members who work for the AFL-CIO. And during 2 days of talks this week, the AFL-CIO had to propose a revised contract that they proposed on Tuesday. The last deal that they had with their own union expired back in February, and this proposal from the AFL-CIO, the one they made in September, was overwhelmingly rejected by 97% of their members. The vote on this latest proposal that was made on Tuesday of this week is expected by early next week. So again, really interesting that even the unions are having problems with their own unions striking or picketing them, which could lead to another strike.
Yeah, I have a solution for that, Bert, and it will match my solution for healthcare, right? I believe all American citizens should have the same healthcare benefits that our Senate gets, and that solves that problem. And Senate may vote on whatever those benefits are, and we will follow suit. That's one. And I think the AFL-CIO employees who are picketing and fighting for their wages and their rights should get the very same benefits and pay increases that the auto workers get. Solved. You just say, whatever we get out of the auto strike, we'll give to you all. And I think they'll be very happy and pleased with that as well. So
I'm sure they would be. It's interesting because when the AFL, and I think you're bringing home the point, Phil, is that the AFL-CIO, when they put their employer hat on versus their union hat on, they don't want to give their own employees anything more than they have to. And
that's exactly right.
Yeah, so your point is well taken. Sticking with unions, let's stay on this topic. Really interesting here. There was this study, Bloomberg just released a study saying that as the United Auto Workers leaders consider expanding the union strike against the big three automakers, they've idled 146,000 workers. Well, I'm sorry, they've idled quite a number of workers already, but if all 146,000 union workers at the big three would strike, there would be a huge impact. Interestingly, in this Bloomberg study, strikes have idled more than 467,000 unionized workers so far this year. The year-to-date total is already twice 2022's total, 4 times larger than 2021 and 8 times larger than 2020. There have been 263 strikes called so far this year that have puts 2023 on a pace for the most union initiated work stoppages since 2005. So it's really quite. Yeah, it's huge. Again, when you talk about almost 500,000 workers in this country have been idled by strikes. And what's making the strikes this year so impactful is their size. Obviously, this is skewed quite a bit by the auto workers strike, but you're talking roughly very close to 500,000 people who have been on the picket lines this year. And that is really quite large. So again, in a couple of the largest ones, the entertainment industry, the film and TV producers, Kaiser Permanente strike, Los Angeles School District, and then of course the big three automakers. So really quite a lot going on. Yep, quite a lot going on in the union sector. Very interesting for labor and employment lawyers such as Jim and me, and management associations and HR like you, Phil, to be keeping our eyes on.
Yeah, Bert, that's okay. We have 500,000 people out on strike, is what you said, but we still have 9.4 million job openings, and only 6.4 million people on unemployment. So even if we employed all the unemployment that we have, we're still going to have a gap of about 3 million job openings. So there's plenty of jobs for them to go out and take if they don't like the job that they have. Makes it pretty easy in my book to do that math. But we're really talking about leverage, aren't we? And that's, that's when unions are going to strike, is when they have leverage. And with the economy and because of those numbers I just shared, where people can't be hired because they don't exist, that's when the union has leverage, and that's when they're gonna use that leverage to their advantage.
Well, and Phil, the problem is actually worse than you even just identified, because we've got all these people out there who are still unemployed, but their skill sets don't match up with where those jobs are. And so
Absolutely, yes.
There's really a disconnect on the people who are available for employment in the places that want to employ them. But I've got a solution for that. Maybe the 5 to 6 million workers that just disappeared from the workforce during COVID, maybe they'll get themselves back in the game one of these days.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if they're going to. I think they've retired, Bert, and they're done. They don't come back usually after that level of retirement, and the number is going to continue to dwindle from that standpoint. And it's one of my favorite topics to talk with you and other HR professionals on. The only solution to this problem is one of two things, and we don't want a very serious, very deep, long-lasting recession and or immigration, and I have zero confidence that we're going to see any resolution with immigration abilities in the U.S. So with that, we're just going to have to keep fighting the good fight. I don't see it being solved any other way. But nevertheless, anything else from Lawyer on the Clock, Bert?
No, I think we've covered it as well as we can today.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, that brings us to our friend Jim Plunkett, coming all the way from Washington, D.C. Jim, thank you for coming back to the program. We love to get some insight. Of course, Jim is employed by Ogletree Deacons and assigned to the Washington Street. So he does have a little bit closer insight to the things that we get involved with here, sometimes in the Midwest and down in Florida. But Jim, I'd just like to maybe have you kick it off and tell us about this mess we have going on right now, and what you think that impact is for us as it relates to all the proposed legislation and rule changes coming up.
Sure. Thank you again for having me back, Phil. So I think what's happening in the House with the Republicans and the lack of speaker, it ticks a couple of those boxes that we saw in that second polling question. Number one, or the one that most comes to mind is embarrassing, right?
Yeah.
Certainly embarrassing for the Republicans, embarrassing for the country. But this whole mess really goes back to almost a year ago, right, Phil, when the Republicans took control of the House in those November 2022 elections, but only did so with a razor thin majority, and therefore it sort of gave this sort of oversized power to a smaller group of folks in the Republican Party. And you were just talking about leverage, Phil, right? When you've got that small majority, you need every vote that you can get. So a lot of these folks who in other situations would be confined to the backbench, they are prominent players, and they forced Kevin McCarthy to go through 14 ballots before he was elected on the 15th ballot to be speaker. There was, if you remember, in May and June, there was this whole concern about the debt ceiling, right? That was in part because of that. There's a big mess there. And then fast forward to the end of September, the government funding situation. They've punted that to mid-November, and then here we are. So when you sort of connect all these dots, you come to this situation where they've kicked out Kevin McCarthy, but did so without really having, I think, a plan in place. I always say I'm a big sports fan, and when they always talk about, oh, should we fire the coach, or do we need a new quarterback or whatever, I'll often say, okay, sure, but who's the alternative, right? You don't want to just do this slash and burn thing and, fire your coach or get rid of your quarterback, and then you end up with plan C, right? And the Republicans are beyond plan C right now in the House. I think they're going on plan D or E. And it is entertainment and embarrassing, right? But for the fact that there's so much happening right now, Phil and Bert, obviously not just in the United States, but in the world. And we need an efficient and competent Congress to act in order to, get aid packages to the Ukraine, to Israel. And there's huge domestic issues as well, Phil, right? I mentioned the government funding problem. They didn't fix that. They just kicked it down the road. Government funding expires November 17th. So all that sort of hand wringing that we were going through the end of September, it seems like we're going to be reliving that in just a couple of weeks. And Republicans have used this time, which they were supposed to be using this, 5 or 6 weeks to get their appropriations legislation in order, and they've just been spinning their wheels, right? So I think we're going to be up against another, deadline in November 17th. There are also major legislative packages that have expired that need to be reauthorized. So things like the Federal Aviation Administration, Congress reauthorizes that every 5 years. Well, it expired in September 30th. They've put it on life support through the end of the year, but we really need the FAA to be reauthorized. Obviously, being able to get on airplanes, whether it's for personal business travel, we need to ship products and goods and widgets, right? We need airlines. The Farm Bill, another massive piece of legislation. That's a 5-year program that expired on September 30th. This sets the nation's priorities for crop subsidies, crop insurance, the SNAP supplemental nutritional program. There's all sorts of federal government programs that are tied up into the so-called Farm Bill. That also expired, and that needs to be redone as well. And the scary thing with some of these things too, Phil, is if we're keep punting them, right, to September or into 2024, and keeping them on life support into 2024, there's going to be a period in 2024 when Congress just sort of walks away from everything because they're going to go on the campaign trail, right? So we could get into a situation with some of these things like the FAA or the Farm Bill. If they wait too long, it's going to be real long before we get, new authorization, and they're just going to be running on fumes. But so it's a real mess, Phil. I don't know what the way out is for Republicans. It doesn't seem like they have that Jim Jordan, who is the latest guy that they put up for speaker. It doesn't seem like he has the votes. There's talk about sort of this compromise situation where they empower Patrick McHenry, who's sort of the acting speaker, I guess you would say, if they give him the powers to move legislation. But nobody really knows. And it's one of those things where I think they asked one time they asked Bob Uecker how to catch a knuckleball. And he said, well, you wait for it to stop rolling and then you pick it up. And in
it feels
a way,
a little bit like that, huh?
Yeah, in a way, that's how I feel about the sort of minute to minute, day to day machinations of what's happening in the House. It's just sort of, you drive yourself crazy if you delve too much into it. So I don't think anybody really knows what is going to happen as the end game here.
One thing I can take from what you're saying, Jim, is that our congressional branch, our legislative branch of the federal government, is now equally as dysfunctional as our executive branch. We don't have any leadership anywhere in this country right now. And I think in a moment of clarity, in an absolute moment of clarity, John Fetterman, of all people, who people will remember, he's our senator from, is it Pennsylvania? I believe our senator from Pennsylvania who had some real health problems recently, could barely walk, could barely talk, yet somehow he got elected. He said in an interview recently, just this past week, that America is not sending their best and brightest to represent them in Congress. Now, to me, that's the ultimate self-own when he says that.
When you say that about yourself as well, right?
Yes, exactly. And so I think that he really did cut right through it, and it's crystal clear that America is not sending their best and brightest to DC in any way, shape, or form, except for Jim, of course. Jim belongs in DC.
I was getting ready, Bert, to make that comment. I know that we sent our man Jim there, and he's doing a good job.
It's a great point, Bert. I do, and I poke fun of Congress in a bipartisan way very often. But I do think we've got about 500 or so elected officials in Congress who are well-meaning and sincerely go there to do good work and to make policy. And then you've got a few dozen or so who are there for the attention dollars, the clicks, the media hits, raising money, a springboard to another career, what have you. And unfortunately, those are the squeaky wheels that get the grease, and those are the ones that we hear about. We don't hear about the folks who are the legislators who are going in there every day and trying to craft good policy. Whether you agree with their policy or not, they're well-intentioned and trying to do what's right. But there's certainly a couple of handfuls of folks there who are in some ways, messing it up for the rest of us.
Yeah, the parallel between America and the way that we behave in all of the cities and states around the country, what we just talked about with strikes and everyone wanting their own and worrying about themselves, and Washington today. I mean, there's such a parallel between that. There's a thread that just weaves through there. Unfortunately, where, the minority is getting the squeaky wheel syndrome addressed, and that's unfortunate because it holds us all back from going forward. Even those who are trying to, draw attention to themselves for different reasons other than the betterment of good.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Phil, real quick, can I talk about two, labor and employment specific policy developments?
I'm going to ask you let's get into some DOL and other things. Yes.
Sure. So we've got a couple of regulations that are about to go final at any moment now. The first is the Department of Labor's independent contractor regulation. That's at the White House being reviewed right now, which is the last step in the regulatory process. So once the White House clears that review, and we'll know about that, there's a website, it'll move off of the website. You can't see the text, you can just see that it's there, the line item. Once that moves off the website, we know that the rule is going to be imminent. This rule is going to make it harder if you engage independent contractors. It's going to make it harder for you. It's going to make it a little bit more challenging. The administration thinks that every worker should be an employee and that every employee should be in a union. And so that's what they're trying as hard as they can to sort of within their power, right? They can't go as far as, say, California went with their AB5 statute, because the Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't go that far, but they're trying they're getting as close as they can to that ABC test that's been challenging for folks in California. The other regulation that's going to go final at any moment is the NLRB's joint employer regulation, and we've been talking about joint employer for years now. I mean, really, the question arose way back in 2014, so we're almost going on 10 years of the back and forth of the joint employer debate. The NLRB, unlike the DOL, because the NLRB is not a cabinet agency, they don't have to give the public any warning about when the reg is going to go final. So we could end this call right now, and then we could open up the NLRB website, and they might be telling us that it went final this morning, right? We don't have that pre-notice that we get from, say, the Department of Labor, but it's going to happen any time now. What we expect it to look like is very close to the 2015 decision called Browning-Ferris, which made it very difficult for employers to engage with their vendors, outside service providers, I think also franchisee relationships.
Sure.
We expect this to really blur the lines and make it harder for employers to, so if you've got the cleaning crew that comes in at night to clean the shop floor, this regulation is going to try to make it, is going to want to lump that cleaning crew in as employers of the warehouse owner or the factory owner, right? Because they're going to say, oh, well, if you
more far-reaching than Uber and Lyft drivers.
Yeah, and it's really trying to go for the deep pockets, and there's all sorts of nightmare scenarios then for employers, because if you're the factory owner and you're now considered the employee of the cleaning crew that you contracted with that comes in on the third shift, all of a sudden then you have to sit at the bargaining table with them and negotiate contracts with them. It's just a nightmare scenario. So both of these actions, Phil, are going to have a real big impact on employers, and both will be the subject of probably multiple legal challenges. I know that employer groups in DC are already gearing up for that fight. So they're coming soon, but hopefully some of these groups will be rushing to the rescue.
All right. Hey, Jim, thank you. I want to take 1 minute and get your opinion on these poll results that we have here. Nick, if you can share them with the audience, please. Let's see. The first one we have here is the question: in what category would you file news from that follows from our national capital? And it looks like the leading category was useful at times. I'm glad no one said entertainment, but there is a source of entertainment there in some ways, but we've risen above that ourselves. Any thoughts when you read this?
Sure. Well, I'm glad to know that at least some of what I say is useful. I do have another comment on that first poll
Question?
about regulatory
Yes.
comments.
Right.
I'm glad to see that this is on the lower side, and I'll tell you why. Employers, I think, should be engaging and interested in what is happening, at the federal level in terms of regulations that are going to impact the workplace. But I never recommend that employers file comments on their own, because there's very little utility in sticking their head above the tall grass, right? Employers should be making their voice known through the regulatory process for sure, but they should be doing so through groups like AIM. Or through their other trade associations, right? They want to do so in an anonymous way, so that they're not the subject of extra scrutiny from the federal government. So, for example, I'm in the process with some of our Ogletree colleagues of drafting comments on the overtime changes that are happening right now, and we're doing it for a group of retailers. Certain brands and companies are speaking through their retailer representative, and we're working on those comments. So you never want to.
That's a great point, Jim. That's a great point. Yeah, well said. Well said. Wonderful. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back here next Thursday at 7:30 Central Time. Jim, we hope to have you back on the program soon. Until then, you take care. Bert, have a great week and go out and be good to someone. Thank you.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link aimea.org/thisweekatwork, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.